righty, just after 5 o'clock Eastern, 3 o'clock in the Mountain Time Zone. This is Ultimate Fantasy Sports Daily on twitch.tv/Ultimate Fantasy Sports. Please chime in on the Twitch message board. Phil Beavis says, Allen Robinson and work the waiver wire, make trades. If you don't, I don't know what Phil Beavis is referring to. Tony's asking if I got the Chiefs. I think I will take the Chiefs. I might have to start CEH. Edwards-Helaire picked up some touchdowns. I'm so confused with running backs. It's the weirdest thing. Oh, first timer from the chat, Garrett Perkins. Stacy's mom, love it. Nick TVIP says, I hear she's got it going on. Yeah, she does. Everybody knows that Stacy's mom has it going on. Like, who doesn't know that, really? All right, you know who's got it going on is a good friend of mine, and very well known in the media circles for lovely hair. So I hope he didn't wear a hat. Tom Gazzola is joining us. It's much better when I can control things and turn your mic on. Tommy, how are you?
Dino, I did my hair for you today, okay? I'm doing good.
I love it. Like, do you ever get sick of people commenting on your hair?
No. You know why? I'm just glad, first of all, that I still have it. If you ever see my dad or meet him, you see he's got nothing left, and I've already surpassed him by a decade of having hair. And I'm just like, I appreciate it. It's like, well, I still have it, and I'm just thankful for it. So bring it on. Like, if you think it's greasy, I don't care. If you think it sucks, I don't care. I just love the fact that I have it. So no problems whatsoever, Dino.
Well, and I hear you on the Gazzola Chronicles, and you're working with two guys who barely have any hair. So you got to make those guys. Well, Gregor does it. He shaves it. Strutty probably should. At some point, he's going to have to go that route. So those guys must be envious every time you're in there.
Yeah, well, I take a ribbing from those guys. You know them very well, and I just chalk it up to being like the younger brother of those two, and I take my lickings and beatings when I need to, and I, being an oldest brother, Dino, I'm like, yeah, now I'm on the other end of it, so I kind of get it. Long time coming, and finally I get a dose of reality from those two and a taste of my own medicine. That's how I look at it. Maybe there's more vitriol there. I'm gonna assume it's more of a positive thing, but I'll take the bashing whenever it comes my way from those two clowns.
Beautiful. Let's talk a little bit. Obviously, this is a fantasy show. What do you do for fantasy? All sports, just football, baseball? What's your fantasy level at?
Yeah, well, okay, I'm only in one league right now. Unfortunately, it's F1, and I haven't set my team. Yeah. Joaquin Gage set it up, and I haven't set my team since I think the third race week. So I'm clearly getting my ass kicked. And I've done football fantasy. I actually came in third in a baseball fantasy one year at my old station in Lloydminster, and then I get roped into hockey fantasy here and there, and usually I just say no because, Dino, I'm so bad at setting rosters, lineups. I forget about it. I generally think I have enough time to get in my roster, depending on the sport, and something happens where I miss out and I don't do it, or my phone glitches. I'm the worst fantasy sports player out there, and I just warn people whenever they invite me for a league, and I tell them, I'm like, listen, you're just wasting your time. Please go and get somebody that will actually commit the time, effort, and resources into making it more competitive, because I'm the worst, and I fully admit it, and I've embraced it, and I just let them know, like, I'm a terrible fantasy sports player.
Interesting. I love that you're in an F1 league. We've got some car racing stuff going on. You guys might be interested as well, so we'll have to chat about that because it's pretty cool. Nick TVIP says, jealous bald man here. So he's obviously jealous of the head of hair that you have as among other people. Okay, so obviously you're doing the post-game show, a job that I did, and I know some nights that job can be a lot of fun. Other nights in February when it's minus 30 and the Oilers get pumped and the power play goes 0 for 5 and people are telling you the worst things ever because you don't agree with them. But it must be better. Like, it has to be better than it, even though they were getting better when I left, they still weren't there. Like, last season had to have been so fun.
Dino, it was. And like you said, it full well. And the listeners at 1260 and the range of emotions that they go through on a night-to-night basis. Those guys on a first-name basis, too. And if it's a good win, they're happy about it. Some of them, if it's a so-so win, if you will, they're still not that content. And then if it's a loss, the sky's falling. Yeah, last year ended up being fun. And you'll remember 16-17 when they went on that run to Game 7 of the second round and lost to Anaheim. It was a step up from that. But, Dino, like December, I mean, you could even go back to like late November, December, January was as bad as it's ever been. And you've been in this market for a long time. You've covered the local teams in this market for a long time. When the fans are pissed off with their teams. And it went from just the best start ever and everything's going to be okay. This team has turned a corner finally to, oh my God, this team is going to not make the playoffs and Draisaitl and McDavid are going to want trades. And then the coaching change happened. And, we had the issues with the media versus the players. I think that was a byproduct of COVID and the setup with the podiums and all that. I think, players got fed up with it. Media got fed up with it. Coaches got fed up with it. Obviously, the fans were fed up with it. Not having that interaction in the room really hurt. So, like, all of it fed into this small window, concentrated amount of time, like a good 6 weeks last year, where it went from great to awful and then went really good at the end to a really fun playoff run. So, last year was something unlike I've ever experienced covering the Edmonton Oilers. And Dean, like, I'm going into year 15 covering this team. I can't believe it either. But the 21-22 Oilers season was just this ridiculously wild roller coaster ride on all fronts. And hopefully there's more consistency in the Oilers game this year where, they're going to be okay. And then by the time they get to the playoffs, we're talking about a team doing some damage again. But, man, it was nuts last year, like just on all fronts.
Yeah, Tom, if you don't know, worked for the Oilers TV, so was right in, the inside workings of the locker room at one point. So you would know both sides of that. And, yeah, when you don't get that one-on-one connection, things get lost in the way or the Zoom call or whatever. It's just not the same. So this is an Oilers team now. Obviously, everybody thinks, McDavid is. I've seen McDavid not go one in fantasy leagues because goals are worth more. Here's the thing. I think McDavid gets 50 this year, and I think the difference between his 50 and whatever Matthews or whoever else gets is going to be made up by the fact that he might get like 130 points. Does Connor McDavid, for whatever reason, just seem like he's ready to, as good as he's been, just absolutely explode this year for some reason?
He's in the best part of his career. He's in the prime. He's just entering it. And I wouldn't be surprised if he took another step and elevated his game. I know people talked about his defensive game in recent years, and now that's not an issue all of a sudden. The way he played in the postseason and how he performed and the points that he put up, even though he was blanketed night to night. And then the fact that he's got Leon Draisaitl there with him, and now he's got a legit scorer and Evander Kane, and we'll see what happens on the right side. But Zach Hyman has been a huge boost to the forward unit. So McDavid going into his prime, having been as good as he has been in the 7-8 years that he's been in the National Hockey League, he might get 50, Dino, just because he wants to, and just to shut up people that are naysayers towards his goal-scoring ability. Like, he is that good. He is magic on the ice, and I know I'm pumping his tires because we see him every day here, but he is literally that good. And I wouldn't be surprised if he got to 130. I wouldn't be surprised if he got 50 goals. So if Matthews, let's say, gets to 60, fantastic. But Connor McDavid could make up the difference with the assist totals. And this is a team that's going to pop off offensively. Like, if in a month we're talking about an Oilers team that the power play isn't clicking and McDavid and Draisaitl don't seem to have it going, like, I don't think that'll last for very long. I think that'll be an anomaly. Like, these guys know they can score. They have so many weapons. the big question will be, is the goaltending better? On paper, seems like it. And then on defense, can they keep pucks out of their own zone, break up cycles, and get the pucks up to McDavid, Draisaitl, Kane, Hyman, Nugent-Hopkins, and the list goes on. Those will be the big question marks. But when it comes to McDavid himself, to me, it's crazy that some people wouldn't take Connor McDavid, because right now he's in that time in his career where he's essentially a lock for first or second in league scoring.
Yeah, as long as he's healthy, you're right. Nobody is going to be able to, I think, unless he misses a whole bunch of games. That's exactly it. So yep. There's the Stars. The blue line is really interesting. And, this is a team that's obviously going to have to, make some maneuvers. But we saw Evan Bouchard and that Bouch bomb that he has. And obviously, he's going to be a key moving forward. What about a guy like Philip Broberg, who is kind of still dipping his feet in? I think he's going to start the year on the roster, but I guess it all depends on training camp. What do you see from Philip Broberg this year?
Smooth, sweet. And Dean, today they're talking about how he put on 10 to 15 pounds. That's great. Like, when old man strength kicks in for him, I know he's young. He's 20, 21 years old. But when he finally, gets that man strength to kick in, that'll go a long way. And it looks like he's put on a little bit of meat and muscle. And if he's playing in a way where he's not intimidated and he can build consistency and find ways to eliminate mistakes that rookies tend to make, hearing footsteps, inadvertently dumping pucks out and getting rid of them because they're worried that there's pressure coming. Like, if he can do that quickly and consistently, he should be okay. But the fact of the matter is, yes, he's probably going to be on the roster. I know Ken Holland's talked about that. And they brought in Ryan Murray to be kind of an insurance policy for Philip Broberg, essentially, which is great to have a Stanley Cup champion and a veteran like that on the roster that doesn't necessarily need to play every single night. But for Broberg, if he can focus on the defensive side of his game like he talked about this morning, and we see some growth there, and he's not hurting the team in his own zone, and he's not getting out-muscled a ton, that would be a perfect start to his NHL career. I know he's dabbled in the league a little bit, but he hasn't really been a bona fide NHLer. And then the offense naturally will kick in because he just has those instincts. He's good at headmanning the puck. He's good at finding open guys in the offensive zone, and from time to time he gets one through and scores. And he's got a great shot too. So if Broberg, like we saw and you alluded to Evan Bouchard, like there were some nights where Bouchard, he looked like a rookie. And even though, they call him dad and he looks like an old guy, he had moments where it was like, boy, Bouchard had a rough night. Sometimes Duncan Keith also had a rough night alongside him. So if Broberg can find ways to minimize those, I think he'll be okay. But the fact of the matter is that those mistakes tend to happen to rookie NHL players, especially on the back end. But they have Ryan Murray there as an insurance policy. I do think he'll be an everyday guy. I think he's got the inside track to that spot on the team. He's going to have to play so bad in training camp and preseason games, Dino, to lose that spot is how it's lining up right now.
And he's different than Bouchard, right? Like Bouchard, we talk about that big bomb from the point. Broberg is a bit more of a distributor, and we'll probably get a little bit more points that way when it comes. Mm-hmm. But it's good to have those different two types of young defensemen that are coming up, because you've got Bouchard and you've got Barrie right now, and you've got Nurse making $9 million. So you got a lot of defensemen, and I know Nurse is going to probably shift over to a lot more of a shutdown and a PK role, but that's a lot of money tied up in some blue liners that do some similar things.
Yeah, and I suppose the difference between Bouchard and Broberg, or Broberg, not so much compared to Barrie, but Broberg transports the puck really well. He's got good speed and nice step, and he gets going. And if he sees a lane, he'll take it, and he'll expose an opening or a gap. Whereas Bouchard, he kind of waits it out, looks for that pass, and isn't the type of guy that's just jumping at certain opportunities. And that's kind of where Philip Broberg has that little wrinkle to his game that maybe other guys don't have. And Barrie, I know there was a lot of talk this offseason about, hey, do you move him out? Is $4.5 million? They need him. They lost Duncan Keith. Yes, they brought back Brett Kulak. That's great. And if they need to change the right side of the blue line at some point, then yeah, Barrie will likely be the guy that's in the spotlight and would be an asset that they could move out. But that comes in time. But as of right now, yeah, it's more of a veteran blue line, which is good. And the young guys have contributed, and we'll see if Bouchard continues to ascend, and I think he should. I mean, Dino, we saw him in the playoffs, and he looked pretty good. So if Broberg, again, can minimize the mistakes, then the back end should kind of take care of some of the concern. But if they do get exposed, if Kulak looks like a third pairing guy rather than a second pairing guy, if Nurse has bonehead plays and continues to do that, this could be a nightmare. But right now we're at a point where it's like leaning good, but there's still the potential for some rough nights.
Yeah, it's you look at this team, and going back to the years that you've covered it and I've covered it, is there was not enough depth. Well, they look like they have that up front, and their blue line. Well, they've got some guys coming on, and then you mentioned the goaltending. Well, they've shored that up, and I think there's an opportunity, obviously, for Jack Campbell, but I think there's an opportunity for Stuart Skinner here, and Stuart Skinner has had some really red-hot moments in his career. So yep. I think the goaltending situation is actually the best that I've seen it as far as potential and future in a lot of years.
Dean, I mean, you're a goalie. The best thing for a goalie is A, to be feeling confident, and then B, to have the guys in front of him confident in knowing that he's going to make the save. Like, that confidence goes so far with teams. And as much as guys talked about, Mike Smith and the battler that he was and how he was so great in the room, he let in the first shot of the game or second, third, fourth, fifth shot of the game so many times last year. And then they would throw Mikko Koskinen in there and he would do the exact same thing. Like, how can you feel confident in your goalies when you're down 1-0 3 minutes in, 15 times a season? If that can be eliminated, then they should be okay. And you're right about Stuart Skinner. Like, that game against Winnipeg last year, he was outstanding. That was probably his best game as an NHL goaltender. And if he can push and make 20 to 25 starts and spell off Jack Campbell, then that's great, and have a winning record. And if Jack Campbell can continue to do what he did in Toronto, I know the last half of last year wasn't particularly great, but if he could be solid for him, that's all they're asking for. And as is tradition in our market, a lot of people always point to the contract and the money and all that's involved. But 5x5 for Jack Campbell, that was just to get in the game, to get him into the city. And who knows, in 2 or 3 years, maybe we're talking about Stuart Skinner and Jack Campbell going 41-41, or maybe it's 50-30, and they're looking at moving on from Jack Campbell. But that's in a few years. But this, like you said, is a good proposition for the Oilers with two goalies that are hungry and look like they should be able to take strides with their careers.
It's so, and I know the Oilers wouldn't have ever appreciated it, but like, the ideal contest on the pregame show would be, is the first goal of the game going to go in? And if it doesn't, like, the pot doubles, and the pot, like, yeah. you wouldn't, nobody would make a whole lot of money on that, because it happened every 3 or 4 games. I mean, and now, like, the Oilers would not love that, but it really was. It's like a drinking game, right?
Well, Dino, the best one was in the 56-game season. Mikko Koskinen plays 12.5 minutes, allows 4 goals on 4 shots, and then can't even break his stick the first whack. It took 2 whacks to break it over the post. I was like, this is it. This is what you're working with. And somehow this team managed to go, deep in the playoffs last year and finish second in its division 3 years in a row with those guys. But yeah, you're right. Like, if we put it out there, question of the day, does the first shot go in? A lot of times that pot's not building up, because they were scoring on those first shots. And some of them were grade A quality chances. Some of them were just terrible, terrible goals. Yeah. But it was so consistent. It was sad.
Baseball quickly. I know you're a ball fan. So what are you more excited about right now? Judge trying to track down, and he's going to, the Roger Maris record to 57 he has, and the record is 61, or Albert Puljos trying to get 700 in a turn back the clock second half for the machine?
I'm liking Pujols right now, because we've watched him for 20 years, and this is a guy that came out of the steroid era, and he's about to reach a mark that 3-4 other guys have done in the history of Major League Baseball. So to me, that's the coolest, and the way he's doing it. I know the universal DH probably helped him out too and prolonged his career, but the fact that he's back in St. Louis, they're having such a good year. It's autumn and he's crushing dingers. It seems like every weekend we're talking about him inching closer. So I was happy when he passed A-Rod because I'm a guy that's like, all right, I know A-Rod was a great player, but he was a jerk and he was a guy that was hard to like. And even when A-Rod did that video for Pujols like a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, I was like, shut up, A-Rod. Like, let Pujols do his thing. Like, this is a guy where we could actually celebrate him. Now, for Aaron Judge, like, I'm fascinated by how we're talking about him getting to Roger Maris's record. And you know, we talk about it on the AL side. And I hope he does it too because he's having a monster season. The guy's a monster human being. But I also find it interesting, and I'm sure you do too, or I'd like to know what you think, but we're not talking about Barry Bonds and we're not talking about Sosa and Maguire so much. It's almost like because of their implications with steroids, they're being like brushed aside. And I don't know if that's appropriate or I'm just appreciating it because it seems like now where guys are getting busted for PEDs, like hello, Fernando Tatis Jr., like that was so dumb. These guys who, you know, if they're not doing these PEDs and they're clean and they're accomplishing these feats, I can truly applaud that and appreciate it. And I love that congruently we have these two guys in both leagues doing something really, really cool.
Well, I think the one reason that it's the Bonds, Sosa, Maguire is not being talked about as much is because this is such a sacred American League record, right? Like this is 61, and none of those guys, Sosa, Bonds, and Maguire, played in the American League. So none of that although there were guys that they were tainted playing in the American League, none of them set that record. So this record has stood for so long, even during the steroid. Like, how did this record not get broken in the American League during the steroid era? So I wonder if that's why. But I think it might too, is that baseball is trying to celebrate something, and it's hard to celebrate something when every time you mention it, somebody brings up PEDs. That's not a celebration.
Yeah. No. And I mean, the guys that are getting busted now, you would just hope that we're past it. And and that's why I brought up Tatis Jr. because I'm like, here's an exciting guy that's going to be, you know, helping San Diego become a contender, a team we never really talk about. And once every 10 years, maybe we're talking about them going on a postseason run. And all of a sudden he sewers it. So I think, you know, having listened to, read, watch documentaries and movies on the steroid era, it's like, okay, finally, like it's that breath of fresh air where it's like they're legitimately doing these things, Pujols and Judge, and you could be like, I appreciate that. But yeah, I understand the AL side of it and Roger Maris and the Yankee tradition and all that. But I was like, wow, we're really not talking about Sosa and Maguire and definitely not talking about Bonds, and I'm okay with that. And I understand the separation, but yeah, I mean, those guys were juiced. Literally, they were juiced, and you know they're their own thing. But if they're complaining about not getting the love nowadays,
that's their fault.
Yeah, you guys, they can take a hike for all I care.
Yeah, and it's going to be weird. Like unless the ball is juiced or something, I don't know how maybe that's why nobody's talking about it, because nobody thinks Judge is going to get close to the 70s, right? Like maybe they think he'll top out at 61 or 62. So here's two different comments from two different Andreas in our chat. One says, best hair in YEG media for sure. So that's good. And another Andrea, who has Dylan Holloway in our fantasy league, says, hey, Tom, does Holloway secure a spot this season? Larry Fisher and I talked about him the other day. Somebody mentioned him potentially for the Calder. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. I just don't know if there's going to be enough ice time, especially on the power play, for this guy this year. But I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Thank you to Andrea 1 about the hair comment. Much appreciated. Andrea 2, Holloway is a guy that's going to have, I think, a great camp to make the team. Now, he might be on the opening day roster, and we know that Ken Holland's going to have to play cap gymnastics to make sure the Oilers are cap compliant and make sure those rookie bonuses don't kick in if they were to call up those guys on their ELCs. So for Holloway, it was interesting just talking to some people around the organization. Like, they're not as set on him being everyday player or on the team right out of the gates. It could happen. I think he would have to have a great training camp, put up points in the preseason, look good defensively, or at least sound enough in his own zone where they can trust him. And you're right, like this roster, Dino, is pretty loaded up front. Not to say that there wouldn't potentially be an opportunity for Dylan Holloway at some point, but I don't think that there's as much of an onus on him to make the team out of camp and to stick around and play minimal minutes when, on the flip side, he could be down in Bakersfield maybe for half a year, maybe for 25 games, and just really popping off down there. And then when injuries, which are inevitable, do occur up in Edmonton, he gets a look and rightfully is thrust into a situation where he's not playing, 3.5 minutes in Game 4 of the Western Conference Final. He did draw a penalty. I acknowledge that. But where he actually gets to kind of stretch his legs out and give her out there as opposed to kind of sitting on the bench right in the pine. But I don't think there's as much of a push for him to be on the team. That's going to be up to him. He's going to get a lot of looks in the preseason, but anything could happen. I don't see him necessarily being a lock for the team right out of the gates.
Beauty stuff, my man. Thanks a lot for joining me. Enjoy that post-game, pre-game show. It's going to be so much fun because they're going to be fun to watch, even on the bad nights. And I don't think there's going to be as many bad nights as they're certainly used to. Thanks for doing this, though, Tom, and I'd like to do it again sometime. Anytime,
Dino. And sometimes those bad nights are just as fun as the good nights, too.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes, I'll be honest, I did just a little bit of needling every once in a while with Oiler fans because you got to kind of stick it in every once in a while to rile it up, right?
Always. That's the fun part of it.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. We'll chat soon.
Thank you, Dino.
Take care. There's Tom Gazzola. TSN 1260 pre- and post-game show, NHL network correspondent as well, and that is... great hair. Andrea, too, says, thanks, Tom, for that answer. So, good stuff. Oh, Larry Fisher says, are you saying the guys weren't confident in Koskinen's glove? Yeah, I don't think anybody was confident in that glove. And Larry says, like the Condor signing, Colton Point today for even more depth in goal. Pickard, Fanti, Point, Rodriguez, it's looking pretty solid between the pipes, glass half full. And Evan Rodriguez was considered the best goaltender in that draft class at one point. So they do have some goaltending depth. They do have some blue line depth. They do have some forward depth. Can they put it all together? That's the big question. Can this team, and listen, last year, as Tom said, they had a horrible time around Christmas, that December. Still bounced back and went deep. Expectations are massive for this team. It is no longer let's hope, let's make the playoffs. Now it's we need to at least get to the conference final. We need to get to the Stanley Cup final. We need to win the Stanley Cup final. It's not just about the playoffs.
Playoffs?
It's winning the Stanley Cup with this team and this roster. I think it's Stanley, honestly, I think this year going into the season, for Edmonton Oilers fans, if they don't reach a Stanley Cup final, they're going to be disappointed. Chime in on the Twitch chat if you will, or hit me up at Duck Millard on Twitter.